this is driven by the profit for these groups and training and things like that, not necessarily. Because we're meeting the needs of most of our kids for a long time. There's no silver bullet. I mean, you gotta have a multifaceted approach and, okay, good.
Are you?
And you know, we're doing, yeah, too much that is not okay. Who are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm all right. I have a cold.
Oh, that's not good.
I'm so happy.
You have a cold or you are cold?
I have a cold. I am cold too. My grandchildren have been in school since January, totally healthy, and grandma comes to visit, and one of them comes home with a sniffle. Because everything I get. I don't know why. Well, they're so far.
Most of the time you find that like the people or the houses that have their
Supposedly, once you
kitchen
travel
sinks on
100
the
miles in
outside
any
wall,
direction, we're in a whole
even
new
fully insulated.
bio.
Right.
Tony Glove,
Biosphere.
it plays to the wall.
Oh, yeah, he does.
Tennessee.
It's about-
Oh, boy, that's a trip.
My
Yeah.
kitchen sink's on the outside wall and the
No.
hot water
That's
happens almost every year.
I was in Tennessee at 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon and in Scottsbluff at 9.
Yeah, just let her.
I guess I should say 3 o'clock because I don't need to mix up my time zone.
That's a nice flight out of Denver, or to Denver. Well,
Isn't it wonderful? Oh my gosh. My son and daughter-in-law are both FedEx pilots. And Memphis is of course their headquarters. And so it's easier if you live near there, but you can also commute.
Well, I think the booster club has a lady today is successfully moving to the foundation.
Oh, good.
That's huge.
That's very good.
So now we're like actually like
Involved in the.
Oh, I did not. I'm gonna go.
only 4 drafts of the
I
bylaws
kind of
later.
talked to her.
Oh,
What?
what was the major
I
sticking
didn't
point?
tell her.
They went to a lawyer and oh my God, you should have
Item
read
L or whatever that is.
Legalese.
Or K.
Drowned out everything. I emailed John, I was like, this is terrible, terrible. Like grammar is actually bad. So,
Oh,
and,
well, I know who, I mean, the lawyers that Vicky and Evans.
yeah, I don't know if he did the revisions, but it just didn't read very well. Like legal wise, it was probably good, but
Yeah, but is it understandable?
it is now. Yeah, we did.
Okay.
We did a few fixes to it. But
Okay.
I'm pretty excited.
Good.
Tom is all about it. So. Is your house? Is it trustee?
Good. Okay. Call
Okay,
this
well,
meeting
just
to
leave
order.
us, okay?
If you'd please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like to welcome everybody this evening. Thank you for braving the cold. As a reminder, if you want to speak during public forum, that you need to fill out one of those yellow sheets by the door and give it to Ms. Fritzler. Public forum is item C on the agenda. Are there any adjustments to the agenda?
Yes, we do have an addition of a new business item under item A on resignations. we would be then the right recommendation to accept the resignation of Director of Curriculum and Instruction and Data Management, Donna Fields, effective June 30th, 2021.
I'd also like to add, as part of our agenda under new business items K and L, those are really discussion items that don't require action, even though under the normal course of business, your new business should have some sort of action. So in consideration, I would like, if there aren't any objections, I would like consent from the body to have those discussions without a formal motion. Is there any objections to that? Okay, thank you. All those in favor of adopting the agenda with the proposed additions, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? I forgot to ask if there's any other discussion about that. Sorry. Any other discussion? Okay. Motion passes. Item B, information and proposals. I sprung something on our student representatives kind of last minute because I was thinking about it before I came down here. Recently, we surpassed 100 days of school, which I feel, especially this year, is exceptionally exciting. So I would like our student representatives just to give us a quick synopsis of how they felt the first 100 days of school.
I've heard no real complaints, so I'd say it's gone well.
Ms. Stokes?
I'd say it's gone pretty good. It's definitely been a lot different than our past years, but it's been good. We've had a lot of changes, especially as an athlete. You have your daily screenings, you've got your masks when you're not on the court, you're not running, you're not. Then you also have quarantining going on, so you have the worry of will I be at school the next week? So you have to be a little bit more responsible and carry your stuff with you all the time. But other than these differences, I'd say everybody's handling the changes pretty good, and we're moving along good. I'd say it's gone well.
Thank you. And I know Ms. Coxbill is joining us via Zoom tonight. Ms. Coxbill, if you would give us your thoughts.
I hope everyone can hear me okay.
Yes, we can.
All right, perfect. I think the first 100 days have gone pretty well overall. I think most of us, especially at Southeast, are pretty happy considering that most of us didn't think we'd make it past September for being in school, and here we are in February still in person. So I think we're all pretty happy with that. And I think for the most part, we're excited. Most of us are excited to see end in sight. So that's all I have.
Great, thank you. And really, again, just want to thank our students and our teachers for their efforts to make sure that we're staying in the buildings and doing what we need to do to deliver the best form of education that we can. So thank you. Number two is you'll notice around the boardroom tonight is some new artwork. This is from Trail Elementary. So if you get a chance this evening or when you're in the building sometime this month, check out that artwork. Thank you to Ms. Baldwin for providing that. And is there a school presentation from Trail? Mr. Florshinger and Mr. Flock. Ms. Vermel, you're just here to cheer them on? Okay, thank you.
Support. She's gonna take over letting us out, which is probably likely. I'm gonna give these to Mr. Flock. You can hand it out to you guys. You guys don't mind providing the mask, so I'll stay distance. For those of you who don't know who I am, or maybe have not familiar with me, I'm Todd Goshen, principal at Trail Elementary. This will be my second year at Trail Elementary, so pretty excited to be here and work with the pretty awesome staff and students at Trail. I'm going to present just a couple of quick things. I know there's a lot on the agenda tonight, so Mr. Flock and I will be brief, but for you guys, so you guys can move on with your business for the night. A couple of things that I'm going to present today is last year, some of you weren't on the board, but those of you who were, approved to spend some money for some specific things, to work with Kristen Bordano. She's with Solution Tree, with Yes We Can, part of our problem-solving process. So I want to go over just one of those things is what Trail's doing with, I mean, you guys have approved that money for us to use. Here's what we're doing with it. Another one is our Horton Gillingham, our phonics approach. That was another chunk of money that you guys graciously approved to spend at the district. So I just want to let you know what we're doing with Trail with that. Most of the stuff we're doing district-wide, but of course this is Trail presentations, so I'm going to highlight what we're doing in our building. If you look at your handout, the first section is our problem-solving team pathways. So through that, just a brief explanation is our universal problem-solving. So our universal, just our classroom teachers in our classroom teaching, doing their best. When we get to the strategic support, what we really focus on is students who are struggling, but not struggling enough where they need to go to intensive problem solving. So this is where our grade levels come in. At Trail, we have 4 teachers at each grade level, 5 right now in 4th grade. So we get together once a week and we problem solve at the grade level around students who are struggling. And we do that. We monitor, we give formative assessment. We see, are the kids making growth? Are we hitting the kids like we're supposed to in their skills? If they still don't respond, then we go to our intensive level of referral, and that goes to our problem-solving team. Our problem-solving team consists of myself, Mr. Flock, the classroom teacher of whatever student that is, our school psychologist, our counselor, special ed teacher, and both of our title interventionists. So then we bring it into an intense level of problem-solving where we're like, now we tried just doing what we can do with every kid. Now we've really got deeper at the grade level. Now this kid's really not responding. Let's go to an intense referral to the problem-solving team. And that goes into intervention, that goes into, man, maybe we're not hitting the right skills with this kid. So let's see what are we missing? So it's really a deep conversation that we're not 100% the best at it right now since it's a new process, but we're making some pretty good leaps when it comes to getting more diagnostic with our kids and what their needs are. So that is kind of our pathway. So whenever you look at this, you're thinking, all right, my student or a student that I know is doing good in the classroom, they're in that universal portion. You know, my student maybe is struggling a little bit, so I know that my teacher and their teams are diagnostically looking at the grade level, or if my student's intervention, we know that you know that they have been to a problem-solving team where we're really looking at what their needs are. So that's kind of the pathway there. The second piece that goes along with that pathway, if you look at the second page, and that's this one here, and this is what we call an ILP, an individual learning plan. And when we get to the intense level of intervention or the intense level of problem solving, basically this houses all the data that we would use to look at a student. So we have our Ames Web data, which is math and reading. We have our STAR data, which is our 2 universal screeners, is what we call them. So we give our screener, we say, man, this kid has scored at, let's say, between the 21st and the 40th. That's just to say, we really want to take a look at this student. That isn't our, he's not, or she's not, that's where she scored, she's an intervention. But it's like, hey, maybe we need to take a little bit deeper look. So then we pull in classroom assessment data, formative data, teacher, anecdotal data, things like that to see, man, is this really accurate or do they need some support? Also on here, has our SIS-SEL screener. Now that is something that we are, we've given in the district. We haven't went as fast through the social emotional teaching as we would want to, but a big step was our screener. So this would tell us in all the 7 areas based on our CASEL standards, where are those students? So this particular student in self-awareness, self-management, all those are at the proficient level. So we wouldn't have to problem solve socially, emotionally around that kid because they're at the proficient level. Now, if they were in need of help at the strategic level, we would bring that kid in and be like, all right, team, what's going on? What do we need to support to be put in place for this kid? Also on that, it has our common assessment data. So we pull the common assessment data for that particular student in that grade level, and we look at where they are in their common assessments. We may see where a kid is scoring at the 71st percentile on their STAR reading, but we look here and we say, in math particularly, let's look at reading. Characters, describing a character in a story, they're a 1, right? So they scored all right on their screener, but they're struggling at that grade level standard. So now, do we need a problem solver on that grade level standard with that team, or is the teacher doing that? Do they need any extra support? So it's a really good tiered support system. We're getting better and better at it every day. It's not perfect. The year that we decided to really implement this fully, we have a lot of obstacles in our way, but it's going forward, and we're pretty excited about it now. Well, I think the better we get at it, the better, the more confidence like our team has. Like right now, it's just we've got groups of kids that are really needing some intensive party intervention, and we've got this process, and then we've got the grade level. So it's kind of putting it all together into like a good system, so it flows nicely.
One of the nice things about this is that we have the Ames Web and we have the STAR and we have the common assessments. So we can triangulate that data. We're not just looking at one specific, the standards and common assessment. So we're looking at how is the student doing across the board on multiple assessments. So
that is kind of our problem-solving process with Kristen. Any questions just on that piece before I move on to the next one? I know I talk fast, sorry. I'm not a good public speaker, I just talk fast all the time. That's my staff. So any questions on that, any more clarification?
I don't have any questions, but I do want to make a comment just because I know you're going to move on to something else, but I do want to commend the trail team. Each school building has their own problem-solving team, and we have an opportunity between the administrators here in central office to pop into their meetings and things around the district because we do those via Zoom also. But the trail team has undertaken this process wholeheartedly. They do an excellent job, and all the team members. This is something new. This is something that is making our system more efficient and better and more suited for our students, and they have taken it on and they've run with some gusto. So I commend you guys for doing a great job at that, and please share that with your team also.
Well, thank you, Mr. Green. Appreciate that. Our second portion is our Orton-Gillingham, and that's that last page. It looks like this. And I want to just go over a couple things. If you're not familiar with Orton-Gillingham, I'm going to read some stuff and make some references, so just bear with me for a second until we get to the document. So Orton-Gillingham is a direct, explicit, multi-sensory, structured, sequential, diagnostic, and prescriptive way to teach literacy when reading, writing, and spelling does not come easily for individuals such as those with dyslexia. It is most properly understood as a teaching approach. It is not a method, it is not a program, it is not a system. It's a teaching approach. In the hands of a well-trained, experienced instructor, it's a powerful tool for to get the breadth and the depth and flexibility to be able to read and write better. Now, all of our staff have been trained. They are highly trained, so it's in the hands of some very, very good teachers. So when we look at our Orton-Gillingham, we're talking about phonics. We're talking about basic reading skills. And it goes from basic reading skills to what we call morphology. Morphology is morphology is like the study of words, meanings, prefixes, suffixes. To start us out, we do like the basic skills. So I'm just going to go over a couple of the multi-sensory experience. Okay, so multi-sensory is you see it, you hear it, you feel it, you don't taste it. I guess that's not seeing, hearing, feeling, and awareness of motion. So, for instance, when we get to one-syllable words like cat, we're in the pound and tap method. So everything is left to right. We write left to right. We read left to right. So we tap and we pound left to right. So act, cat. That's part of the multi. I mean, so you're feeling it, you're tapping it, you're saying it, you're seeing it. Okay. Then we get into where the other part of the multi-sensory experience is we have sandpaper, or I'm not sure what else it's called. It's like a screen. Yeah, we put it underneath the paper, and then when the kids they pound, act, cat, then they write it with their crayon. They feel every single bump in that letter, in that word. Another part of the multi-sensory experience. So it really gets into all the things that research would show to help students really understand phonics. The next method we talked about in the multi-sensory experience is like I'm not sure what it's called. Is it a specific name, Mrs. Brown? Okay, anyway, I call it the ARM, okay? So we will look at words like the word method, and this is how we get in our minds repetition to how we spell words, because I am a horrible speller and I can't spell worth a darn. But I learned to spell some words with this because it gets it in my mind. So the word method, M-E-T-H-O-D. So we go M-E-T-H-O-D, method. M-E-T-H-O-D, method. And we do that 3 times, and then we write it on our crayon. So it's all getting those hearing, seeing, feeling, experiences into learning phonics. And it really does do well for our students who really struggle. 2 other components of it are red words and green words. So red words and green words. Green words are words that follow spelling rules. You can sound them out. There's a rule, so you know how to spell. Red words are words that follow no rule. You can't sound them out. So I have it on here. I said reference the movie Dumb and Dumber. You've all seen it, right? Lloyd and Harry are sitting on the bed. He pulls up the paper and he's seeing that Mary's at this. So he's trying to read it. He's reading through it and he gets this word. He goes, head. He's like, it's a big one. The's a red word. There's no spelling rule. You cannot sound it out. So when we talk about red words, we talk about words like that. Okay. Morphology is kind of the next piece of it. So 4th grade, 5th grade, especially in morphology. And morphology is the study of words, how they're formed, the relationships between prefixes, suffixes, a Latin root with a Greek prefix. I'm just making things up, but it's okay, how they go together. But you know what I'm saying? Suffixes and prefixes and root words and where they come from, how they make up their own language. By learning about morphology, I have learned English language is not as complicated as it seems once you know where words come from, where their roots come from, where their prefixes and suffixes and how they're used. It's really not that complicated. And it's made me a better learner because when I see these words, I'm saying, oh, it's spelled like this, it must be a Greek word. So then I've got that background knowledge. The kids are just getting into morphology right now in 4th and 5th grade, so it's excited to see what that brings us. Sorry, I know I said I wasn't going to go over 3.5 minutes, didn't know that I got so the sheet that you're looking at is kind of our weekly lesson plan for our orthopedic teaching strategy. So we look at Monday, we go through the multisensory experience, we brainstorm. Tuesday, we review red words, we teach 2 to 5 new ones, and it's just every single week we do the same thing with a new concept. So by the end of 3rd grade, we should get all through all 26 concepts. So from K to 3, all 26 concepts. 4th grade, we review spelling rules, we get the concepts that they didn't quite grasp, we move on to morphology. 5th grade, we do the same thing. So that's kind of how it looks for us at Trail and across the district. Part of our K3 reading goal, getting our students to read at grade level by the end of grade 3. This is the big piece of it. This is a huge piece. So I appreciate that you guys spent money on these 2 things. This is how we're using them at Trail. And I'll give you updates as we go. And if you have any questions around that piece, some questions around that.
I just have one question.
Yes.
I see this through 2 different age students' eyes, right? Kindergarten and 4th grade. And so it's very different. But those that are more advanced, do you struggle to keep them involved with the phonics portion? That specifically talking to my 4th grader, she struggles to. That's what she comes on.
Yeah.
I hate OG time.
Yeah.
But how do you keep them
okay.
engaged in this work?
So what we did this year is because this was the first year that we have implemented this teaching strategy, I decided at Trail that we would start at concept 1. There was 2 reasons for that. One, for our teachers, first time teaching it, starting at the very first concept and working through. So there are students who are like, I know this already. I get that. But part of that is 1 for the teachers. 2 is to get those kids into that rhythm. So like next year we'll give our screener and there might be a group of kids in concept 5, 12, and 14, and that's where they'll be. We won't start everybody at once. So those kids who already have those skills, wherever they're at, that's where they're going to start next year. But for the sake of getting used to this new method, and for the sake of our teachers feeling comfortable, we started at concept 1. The trainer, Candy Schneider, didn't agree with me until I explained to her why, and she's like, okay, I get that, but next year, no, you're not doing that.
Very good.
So, but yeah, you're right. We do struggle with the students who have those skills already. Some of them really like it, and some of them are like, I know what we want to do. I want to guarantee when your 4th grader goes to 5th grade, they've been taught those skills.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I want to interject. I know this isn't my thing, but we have a kindergartner and he has a brother that's in 4th grade. And he was very mad because he and his brother were learning the exact same skill. He's like, how is it that he knows that rule? And they were kind of learning it at the same time. So it was interesting that they were.
Not where we want to stay, but where we
Very good.
Well, and I think too, it's interesting as I reflect back too on my learning, that I was pretty quick to pick up things, whole language, whole reading, and struggled with the phonics and didn't really enjoy it. But then I thought, really interestingly enough, one of the key things that I've struggled with after that has been my spelling. And so not learning those skills that they are now and being able to spell proficiently is going to be a skill that they'll actually depend on. But this is something, again, I appreciate bringing this up, Tyler, and talking about this, because this is a district-wide initiative. And we have taken it wholeheartedly. We're one of very few districts, as I understand it, that have taken the whole district approach. There's usually pockets and things, but we felt that this is such a significant program and way of instructing in the area of reading that we think can make such a significant difference for our kids, that we felt it's that important. We feel it's that important for any new teachers coming on board, that we plan to make sure that any new teacher coming on board will be trained going into this for that school year, because we feel that this has the opportunity to make the largest difference for our students in reading achievement.
You know, the phonics piece is huge. The comprehension piece is just as big, and it will morph into other skills, but right now our focus is that basic phonics, and we got that down, and we know that variable is taken out of play. So I'm gonna pass out this stuff. I'll let Mr. Flock introduce himself. I'm sorry, we're taking way more time than we anticipated, but it's good stuff.
There we go. Thank you, Brian. Technology is awesome. So I'm Mr. Flock. I'm the Dean of Students at Lincoln and Trail. And so I want to thank you for giving us time tonight to talk about what we're doing. I'm going to be talking a little bit about what we're doing in the area of behavior. I want to start with this quote. Kids do well if they can. Those are pretty simple words, but in the world of education, that's a pretty deep message, because I've never come across a student who doesn't want to do well. Every student that I've ever worked with in the last 20 years, they want to do well, not only in academics, but also in behavior. And so some students just don't have the tools yet. And so at Trail, Tyler and I sat down and we came across this point sheet that I want to share with you guys. And so we identified 10 students who would benefit by receiving behavioral support through a point system that Mary Smock provided us. Back in 2019, Mary Smock did a training during our special ed collegial time, and part of that training, there was a point sheet that I kind of fell in love with. I thought this is going to be good for students, especially those students that have high behavior needs. And so 6 out of those 10 students that we identified at Trail are currently receiving special education services. They either have a behavior plan in place or a behavior goal. And then 4 out of the 10 students that we identified are regular education students, but they have some pretty significant behavior needs. We identified those behavior needs through either special education services, through a functional behavior assessment that we gave to the students. They transitioned over from Lincoln to Trail with a behavior plan in place through an IEP. Teachers might have identified a need within their classroom through write-ups or other documentation, or going back to that social emotional learner screener that Tyler was talking about, we identified some behavior needs based on that. So based on the identified behavioral concerns for each student, we created a point system that's specific to those individual students based on what behavior needs they have. And that was tracked throughout the school day. Here's what that point sheet looks like. And in the 20 years of education, this is hands down by far the best point sheet that I've come across. A lot of times with point sheets, students forget to take it to class, or teachers forget to fill it out. The fidelity isn't typically there with behavior point sheets. I like this one. If you notice at the top where it says Monday, there's a point sheet for each day of the week. And so the students carry these point sheets around, and you'll have Monday through Friday. On the left-hand side, you'll see the expectations, organizational skills, learning out, and staying in their seat. These are the behaviors for this individual student. The student schedule goes across the middle. If you look at the very first column on the left-hand side where it says school begins at 8 o'clock to 8:30, the students have an opportunity to earn 2 points, 1 point, or 0 points for each behavior in the area of organizational skills, in the area of learning out, and then staying in their seats. So the students can earn a total of 6 points per class period. And this follows them throughout the day. One of the cool things about this is we can look for trends. So as the day goes on, after recess, they go to reading. The student goes to reading. Over a period of 2 weeks, if we start to notice that there's a trend where the student is scoring 2 out of 6, 1 out of 6, 3 out of 6, we might pull the team together and say, you know, what's going on? If the student is medicated, is the medication wearing out? If the student's, based on test scores, struggles in the area of language arts, well, if you notice the schedule is reading, OG, and writing. Well, that might be a cause for some behavior. So we come together as a team and look at these point sheets and look for trends.
And also look at trends through just that one specific subject too, through weeks and weeks of, and specific to the expectation to the target behavior too. So there's lots of different ways to target that.
One of the cool things about this point sheet is that if I'm a classroom teacher and the student just went to lunch, went to recess, came back, maybe I haven't seen that student for a few hours, I can look at this point sheet and I can see what kind of student is coming into my classroom. Has he struggled throughout the day? If he struggled throughout the day, maybe he's had a hard time staying in the seat. I might give him some tasks in my classroom to get him up, get him moving around a little bit. And so it's nice to look for trends in this data. Not only can you see how students are doing in each class period, but you can also see how students are doing in each behavior across the school day. So if the top row is organizational skills, they can earn 2 points, 1 point, or 0 points in every class period for a total of 20 points. And so we can look and see, okay, what is that one behavior that they're doing well with? What is that one behavior that they need to focus on and maybe they're struggling with? Here's a place for teachers to write down notes. This is a communication log for our art teachers, PE teachers, our regular education teacher, to be writing down things that the student's doing well that day, maybe some struggles. It just gives teachers a heads up on what's coming into your classroom. So at the end of each day, the student brings their point sheets down to Mr. Bila, who is a special education teacher at Trail, and myself. We add up all the points out of 60 points. This row that I highlighted down below, the goal is an 86% for this student, which would be 52 out of 60 points. We write down the total number of points the student earned and turn that into a percentage. And then based on that percentage, students can earn some preferred time at the end of the day. For this student, he wants to be on his computer. He wants to spend time at the end of the day doing computer time. So if he earns an 80 to 85%, he'll get 5 minutes of computer time. 86 to 90, he'll get 10 minutes of computer time. And then a 91% to 100%, he'll earn 20 minutes of computer time, which seems like a lot. But we have to remember that these students were losing 10, 15 minutes of instructional time in each period before we started this point sheet. On the back of the point sheet, are the behavior expectations. This is the teaching component to this point sheet. So when the student comes in and we conference at the end of the day, these are the things that I would go over with the students and how the student can earn 2 points, 1 point, or 0 points. So for staying in their seats, instruction time was a big deal for this teacher. The student was getting up, moving around, distracting other students, getting up to sharpen his pencil, throw something away. So during instruction time, we want this student to be in his seat 100% of the time. Then during independent work time, then he can get up and move around.
What's nice about that is when a kid comes in and struggles with organization, Mr. Beeler, Mr. Watkins specifically reteach the expectations, not just the consequence form, but a teaching component of what the purpose is.
So here's an example of what that would look like when a student would bring it down to me at the end of the day. This student earned 32 out of 42 points. Like Mr. Forstier said, we can conference with this student and say, okay, where did it go really well for you today? And the student would probably say math. I earned 6 out of 6. I had 100% in math. In terms of behaviors, what went well? The student can look over and see, well, I got 14 out of 18 on work completion. I did fairly well getting my work done. And then we can talk to the student and say, what area do you need to work on tomorrow? 6 out of 18, blurting out. That would be the area that we focus on with those expectations. But what does the 76% look like? This is a really cool component to this behavior point sheet. See if this works. This is an Excel document, and they created this Excel document for us. So this makes it super easy. All I have to do is I put in the date, September 23rd, 2020. I put in the points earned, 32 out of 42. This Excel document automatically turns it into a percentage. I don't have to calculate that percentage. Not only does it turn it into a percentage, but it also drafts it for me. And so this 76% is highlighted in that red box. The red line is the 86% goal. And so when we have parent-teacher conferences, when we have IEP meetings, this is great information for parents to look at. This is easy to understand. And so as you can see, anything on the line or above the line, the student is meeting or exceeding his goal. This is a good example of what it looks like.
So for instance, you drop a little bit of a line right here. So whatever date that was, you can go back to the notes, and maybe you'll show that on a different slide. And it'll say like that day, I would imagine something's going on or the kid didn't fill out his point sheet. So it would reference that to the notes of why they dropped below their 86%. It wasn't just because of behavior, it could have been something else.
And so this is what Tyler's talking about. If I can grab it and make it a little bigger. And so this is another student's data. This is another student's graph. As you can see, there's lots of peaks and valleys. There were good days, and there were days where it was kind of rough. Rather than bringing 100 point sheets into a meeting, I can take those notes from the point sheet and type them in off to the side so that if parents saying, well, what happened, on October 15th, I can go over and I can say, well, he stopped bringing his point sheet to class. There was a sub, so behavior was a struggle in the afternoon. So I can do a little summary of what happened that day. So at the beginning of the presentation, we talked about 6 students who were receiving special education on this point sheet and 4 students who were regular education students. Here's the data for the 4 regular education students. And the chart that you just saw is student C. So under responsibility, he scored 67%, respect 64%, school safety 71%. Student A, B, and D are up in the 80s and 90s based on their behavior.
So baseline for this, Mr. Flock and I, looking at it, less than 50% of the time as a baseline, the students were successful before we started the point sheet, before we started teaching, before we problem solved at the grade level, before these students needed any intense referral to a behavior intervention. So I mean, they're still at 93%, 93%. We're probably not gonna take them off for a while. It's gonna be some gradual release because they're being successful with this.
Student B was scoring so high, we thought about taking him off. We took him off for about a week, and his behaviors came back. And so we put him back on the point sheet. And we're gonna look at some sort of gradual release where we don't just drop the point sheet. Maybe we monitor it for mornings and afternoons, or 2 or 3 times a day. Here's the data for the students that are receiving special education. And this is phenomenal. We have students, as high as 98, 96%. We have students, they're down in the 61, 62%. But we have to remember where these students started. They didn't start nearly that high. So we have one more quote. If some students are unresponsive, maybe you can't teach them yet, but you can love them. And if you love them today, maybe you can teach them tomorrow. This system isn't perfect. We're going to have our good days and we're going to have our bad days. But when we have our bad days, we need to make sure that those students leave our classrooms knowing that the teachers care. So, any questions?
Thank you guys very
Thank you.
much. Sorry we took them one time and I said I need to.
That's all right. Thank you, gentlemen. And as you progress through the week, if you happen to have any questions for them, feel free to email them. I think they'd be happy to answer them, even if we're not in this format. Okay. Moving on to item C, public forum. Do we have any? Okay. Item D, consent agenda. Are there any items which any trustees wish to remove from the consent agenda? Hearing none, are there any objections to approving the consent agenda as presented? Been moved to approve the consent agenda. Do I have a second?
So,
Thank you. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the consent agenda as presented, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Is there any abstentions? Motion passes. Moving on to old business. Item A, consider the approval of proposed revisions to District Policy 3380 as presented on second and final reading. The recommendation is to approve the proposed revisions to District Policy 3380, public gifts and donations on second and final reading. Can I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor of approving the proposed revisions to District Policy 3380 on second and final reading, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Are there any abstentions? The motion passes. Item B, consider approval of proposed revisions to District Policy 5150.5 on second and final reading. The recommendation is to approve the revisions as presented to District Policy 5150.5, no student activities night as presented on second and final reading. Can I have a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
second.
Moved and seconded to approve the revisions. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of approving the revisions to District Policy 5150.5 as presented on second and final reading, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Are there any abstentions? The motion passes. Moving on to new business. And before we jump into that, because there are some things in new business concerning expenditures, I asked Ms. Cates to pull this report. It's called the Fund Balance Comparison, and it was sitting separate in the packet of stuff at your stations. This is usually included in with the financial statements and the consent agenda. But I thought the discussion and questions last month were really, really well done. So I thought, and Ms. Cates agreed, or Ms. Cates thought, and I agree, excuse me, that having this available so you can see kind of where some of this, when we approve expenditures, where that's coming from and what the balances are. So I would turn your attention to that middle column, December 2020. That's kind of where we started this calendar year, just for your reference as we proceed through some of these expenditures. Okay, under new business, item A, consider and accept the resignations submitted by certified staff members. I'll read them off. Sharon Durfee, a second grade teacher at Lincoln. Lindy Ellis, science teacher at Torrington High School. Jessica Gersel, did I say that right? I apologize if I didn't. Special education teacher at THS. Jenna Kruger, second grade teacher at Lincoln. Lori Orr, fourth grade teacher at Trail. Mary Perkins, library media specialist for Torrington Middle School and Torrington High School. Dave Plindle, assistant principal and athletic director at Torrington High School. Mark Sims, physical education teacher at Torrington High School. LaDonna Sittner, math teacher at Torrington Middle School. And Donna Fields, director of curriculum at all of that big title she has. The recommendation is to accept the resignations as submitted, effective at the end of the 2020-2021 school year. Can I have a motion?
I so move.
Can I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion?
I'd certainly like to note for myself and probably the rest of the board our deep gratitude and appreciation to all these folks for their service and their dedication to our students and our community during their tenure as employees of the district. We know many of them are responsible for the success that their students achieved in school, largely because their contact with those teachers. And I'm looking at you, Mr. Sims. And that's invaluable. So thank you so much, folks.
Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of accepting the resignations submitted by the certified staff members, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Are there any abstentions? The motion passes. Item B, consider approval of proposed revisions to district policy 5152.5, homeless children, and new title as presented on introduction and first reading. The title change is to children or youth in transition. Can I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of approving the proposed revisions to district policy 5152.5 as presented on introduction and first reading, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Any abstentions? The motion passes. Item C, consider the approval of adding new courses to Goshen County School District #1 curriculum, adding edmentum elective courses as approved by the Wyoming Department of Education and other proposed course exceptions for the 2021-2022 school year. That is the recommendation. Can I have a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving of adding new courses to the curriculum, adding edmentum elective courses as approved by the Wyoming Department of Education and other proposed course exceptions for the 2021-2022 school year, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Any abstentions? The motion passes. Item D, consider approval of purchase exceeding $5,000 for the purchase of an interactive touchscreen. The recommendation is to approve the purchase of 6 interactive touchscreens to assist with remote learning from Troxel Communications through the Buy Board Purchase Consortium in the amount of $13,728 funded through the Wyoming CARES Act program. Can I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? None. All those in favor of approving the purchase of the 6 interactive touchscreens from Troxel Communications through the Buy Board Purchase Consortium in the amount of $13,728, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Are there any abstentions? Motion passes. Item E, consider approval of purchase exceeding $5,000 for the purchase of laptops for district instructional staff. The recommendation is to approve the purchase of 7 Dell laptops for instructional staff from Sterling Computers in the amount of $10,024 funded through the 2020-2021 General Fund Tech Budget. Can I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Brian, are these, or excuse me, Mr. Foster, are these replacing or additional or?
They're replacing current, mostly high usage staff. That's why they're on a separate purchase order.
Any other discussion? All those in favor of approving the purchase of 7 Dell laptops from Sterling Computers in the amount of $10,024, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Are there any abstentions? The motion passes. Item F, consider the approval of the purchase of hardware equipment for district internal Wi-Fi upgrade project. Recommendation is to approve the purchase of hardware equipment for district Wi-Fi upgrade project from Golden West Technologies in the amount of $96,549.90. This is to be funded through the E-rate funding program for $67,685.93 and capital construction for $28,964.97. Can I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Can I have a second? Is there any discussion?
I have just a question. Is this a yearly, how often do we upgrade this stuff?
Particular items are upgraded every 5 to 6 years, and they qualify
qualify for E-rate funding, which is for things like wiring and infrastructure inside the buildings, things that most people won't see in the switch room and so on. And so because of that, we are a 70% funded district. And so they will pay 70% of that cost, and we have to come up with whatever difference would be. So it's pretty cost effective to do that and to keep your equipment current. That's one of the reasons why we're upgrading these, is because with all the computers that we're now using that we use wirelessly as opposed to being wired, we have 60, 80, 100 some computers on one device at a time, and we have to have.
Mr. Foster, can you also explain what E-rate is for those that may not know what, or be familiar with E-rate?
Yeah, a number of years ago, they had a fund that was going, that the government, that they created in order to get phone systems into the rural areas. And so we all pay taxes into that. And after a number of years, everybody has a phone line and all of that happens. And so they said, well, we got to use that money someplace else. So they kept that funding, but they changed it into funding schools and libraries and places like that, so they could get broadband wire connections. And so that, which was a tremendous amount of funding actually, came out, and that's what's really wired schools and things like that over the past 30 years or so. It's been going into that, so it's really been helpful to get schools up to where we are today.
Thank you, Mr. Foster.
Any questions or discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of approving the purchase of hardware equipment for the district Wi-Fi upgrade project from Golden West Technologies in the amount of $96,549.90, 70% funded by the E-rate funding and the rest from capital construction, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Any abstentions? The motion passes. Item G, consider approval of the purchase of 2 server clusters for district storage infrastructure from Golden West Technologies in the amount of $82,303.50, funded through major maintenance. Can I have a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion?
I guess just noting on here the difference between the two quotes. The second quote from Pineco Consulting is not on here. What drove such high cost difference? Were they quoting the same thing? Just one's a Wyoming company and the other is a South Dakota company. So I'm just curious.
The difference between those quotes is there can be a lot of different configurations of the same device. The actual quotes that we had to disqualify some of them because they mailed them in late or whatever. And so we didn't get those. But the quotes actually ran from, we had some at $82,000, we had some at $94,000, there were some at $104,000. And then Pineco, the only 2 that actually qualified were these 2. The others either did not mail it in correctly or they didn't get in on time. One of them came in 3 weeks late. So it got here last week, January 20th, I believe. So there were quite a difference. 2 companies that bid similar items. One was 82 and then it was 94. And then Pineco, there were 2 companies that bid what they bid, and one of them was 104. So that was kind of it.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Foster, you feel that the project or the way they're planning to configure this is gonna be sufficient for what the district needs.
I actually reached out to Lemmy County One, and I asked them if they would have their people look at that for me. And they would have taken, Golden West actually had two quotes. One of them was for like $50,000 more for $130,000. That was for this bigger, more, and they all wanted that one. I go, well, that's gonna be hard to explain that much extra money. But they also had ETS, who is the state's tech service. I had their people look at it, and they control all of the data for the state of Wyoming, and all their server farms and all that. And they said, yeah, that thing will do more than what you want to do with it. That will be fine. And we also would like to have the bigger one that we understand where you're at. So I felt comfortable with what they advised, as well as that was also the cheapest one.
Sure. And I just asked because, you know, it's fine to go with a cheaper bid, but if we have to 2 years down the road, spend that extra, you know, I was just curious to make sure it was going to do what you needed it to do.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Cates.
I'd just like to share, I helped Brian in looking at these quotes, and the 82,000 is what was requested in the bid documents. And the 135 that Brian's referencing was provided as an alternative. But in order to look at apples to apples, we had to look at the 82,000.
I have one other question on this. How long do you anticipate these changes to last at the current rate that we're going? I mean, is it 5 to 6 years on this too, or what? Just out of curiosity.
These will last longer than that. We anticipate probably 8 years. Well, actually, that's maybe incorrect, because the tech world is changing. It used to be that we stored a lot of our information on site, and now we don't anymore. We've been moving a lot of it to the cloud. So a few years ago, if we had bid, well, we actually did bid one of these a few years ago, and it was $180,000 because it was 64 terabytes, I believe, at that time. And we just couldn't afford it. So we've been carrying this one through for these last 3 years because the warranty's gone. And it's been costing us $5,500 a year to pay extended support. And so in 3 years' time, we're going to make $15,000 of this back. So probably 8 years, but we probably won't. It may be a lot longer than that because we won't even use it as much.
And Mr. Foster, I'd like to thank you and compliment you for reaching out to those other entities to get their input on what they considered appropriate for our needs. I appreciate that initiative. So keep it up.
Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the purchase of 2 server clusters for district storage infrastructure from Golden West Technologies in the amount of $82,303.50, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Are there any abstentions? The motion passes. Item H, consider the approval of the purchase of laptops for students and staff use, 150 Microsoft Surface Go laptops and 59 for student use and 59 Microsoft Surface laptops for staff use from the Microsoft Store in the total amount of $213,802.57, funded through the 2020-2021 General Fund Tech Budget. Can I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there one of you want to second that?
I can.
Okay.
Second.
Is there any discussion? Again, I'm going to ask the question of this, is this replacement or new?
Yeah, this is replacement. We have kind of a 2-tier system where the first tier are our computers on the front line, And after the warranty is gone, which is typically 4 years, then we move them down to tier 2. So they would be moved down from maybe like a high school setting to elementary setting. And they would work okay for that. And so these are tier 1 computers that they would be replacing. As you can see, we're going to try to put those in the freshman class. And then those computers then would waterfall down to a lower level. And so we're getting about 8 years out of computers, 7 to 8 years. This year was the first year that we've had computers out one-to-one from all grade levels. That's one of the reasons that I went with these, is because they do have a breakage warranty as a component. And even with that, they were a better price than what we were getting from the company that we bought with last year. So it just seemed like that was a wise choice to do, considering we don't know what we're going to be in a year or six months from now. So that's why we did that.
Thank you. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of the approval of 150 Microsoft Surface Go laptops for students and 59 Microsoft Surface laptops for staff from the Microsoft Store in the amount of $213,802.57, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Are there any abstentions? The motion passes. Item I, consider the approval of the purchase of 2 42-passenger buses from Elder Equipment in the total amount of $209,270 funded through the fiscal year 2021 general fund budget. Can I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
Mr. Kramer, is it correct that these are reimbursed to the state, correct?
That is correct. I don't know if Ms. Gates has anything to add to that or anything in addition to the reimbursement plan from the state level.
Actually, if it would be okay, I would divert to Mrs. Donna Bott. She's on Zoom.
So if I heard right, the question is, are these reimbursable? I'm having a hard time hearing.
That's correct.
Yes, they meet the replacement plan, and so they are 100% reimbursable.
Thank you. So just for discussion purposes, when we say 100% reimbursable from the state, this is coming out of the general fund, but we end up getting reimbursed.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, what happens, we have this in our budget to fund the bus purchase this year. We then, over the next 5 years, will receive the amortized funding of these buses. So we have the money set aside to purchase it, but the funding model has it coming back to the district based upon a 5-year lease amortization.
Okay.
So to clarify then, that is under the current funding model. Should the funding model be adjusted, we are at risk of not receiving the current reimbursement.
Actually, we would be grandfathered in given it being made this year.
Thank you.
Is there any other discussion?
On the memo where it's just on the bottom of the page saying the years and the miles, is that just the buses that are needing replaced, or what is that table?
Mr. Chair, members of the board, Mrs. Bott could elaborate, but these are type C buses. So what she's showing is that they either need to be 17 years old or have 240,000 miles in order to meet the replacement standards of the state. And these buses do that.
where do the old buses go?
We take them to auction. Sell them at an auction if we can.
What we'll do though is that we have kind of a tiered approach like what Brian Foster spoke about, is that these new buses will go into the route fleet. Then we'll have buses go into a spare setting. And then there's ones that are spares that will go to auction.
So then what do we, so we send them to auction, and if they sell, where do those funds end up going?
Those funds revert back to the state.
Okay. Is that over, like, we adjust the amortization schedule then of that 5-year reimbursement, or is it just, we just send it to the state?
It's part of the reporting process.
Okay, thank you.
But the state initially funded the buses, so we're responsible to revert that back to them.
Thank you. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the approval of purchase of 2 42-passenger buses from Elder Equipment in the total amount of $209,270, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Any abstentions? The motion passes. Item J, consider the approval of contracting with J&J Floors for the screening and refinishing of all district gym floors excluding LaGrange in the total amount of $16,450.50, funded through major maintenance. Can I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Can I have a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion?
How often do we have to do this?
Mr. Chair, the screening and refinishing is a yearly activity. It's a safety factor for those gym floors, otherwise they're too slippery. We screen and refinish yearly, and then approximately every 10 years, we sand and refinish. LaGrange doesn't get the activity, so LaGrange is about every 3 to 4 years needs to actually screen and refinish.
Any other questions or discussion?
I was kind of surprised it seemed low to me when you're talking all the gym floors. So, yay.
And this doesn't also, because Lincoln's floor is different. This doesn't.
This is all the wood floors.
Wood flooring, okay. Okay. Is there any other discussion? All those in favor of approving the contract with J&J Floors for the screening and refinishing of the district floors, gym floors as presented in the amount of $16,450.50, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Any abstentions? The motion passes. Moving on to item K, there is no action. Considering, or we're going to discuss the district contingency or carryover fund for next year. We've invited Senator Steinmetz, Representative Hunt, and Representative Duncan, who is on Zoom, to come and give us a little information, kind of some high-level discussion about what's happening at the state, how that affects public education. And there is also this report that was in your stack that we'll be talking about after they're done with their comments. And really the intent here is to kind of get everybody on the same page as what's happening so we can plan accordingly. And with that, I will turn it over to our representation. whoever, but Senator Steinmetz, if you're ready, floor is yours.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and we'd like to work together if that's all right, and if Representative Duncan wants to chime in at all. Would that be all right with you?
Absolutely, please.
All right, thank you. And we have some handouts for you. This is the kind of information we're bombarded with all the time, so. Okay, I'll go this way and you go that way.
Oh, that'd be great.
Oh,
brilliant. Yeah.
So we really appreciate your time today to visit about finances and appreciate the opportunity to have that discussion. One of the things that hit me when we were talking about all of this and we were bantering a few emails back and forth was maybe we aren't all receiving the same information. I don't know what information you get. You probably don't know what information I get. And so I thought it might be important just to have some documents before us and all be on the same page. So if you could take out your document that looks like this, it says assignment K-12 package B1. And this is our long-term fiscal profile. And so as I read a few talking points from our body, I want you to start studying that. Wyoming is facing historic revenue shortfalls. Declining energy production and prices, which have long been our state's economic drivers, have created a budget deficit that is going to get even worse in the next 2 biennia. The legislature and residents have to decide. Our government must either create new revenue streams, which would be taxes, or significantly reduce government services and programs. Neither will be easy. And we have started the process of reducing the government expenditures. As you all know, when we left the legislature last year, COVID hit immediately. And so the ink wasn't even dry on the state budget, and we were already $1.5 billion in the hole. And that's where we started out working with the budget. Hans can probably attest to that as well. It was a very difficult time. At this juncture right now, having gone through the governor's recommendations of reductions to the Department of Health, to the Department of Family Services, to our senior citizens, to almost every agency and service across the state that will affect our communities in so many dramatic ways. Even St. Joseph's Children's Home, our court-ordered placements, our peak wellness by the hospital, many services are being reduced and will have a huge impact on our community. These are not easy decisions, and they're none that we want to make. We don't want to, but we don't have a choice because of our revenue situation. So with the budget coming out, the governor's recommendations, and then our committee, the committee I'm on this year is the Joint Appropriations Committee. We then work the budget, and as the budget stands right now, and you can find it on the website, we have cut $445, almost $450 million out of that our last budget. And going forward, many of those cuts will be sustained. So our revenue outlook does not look promising. We have lost our ability to lease state or federal land for mineral production. And so that is where 50% of our education funding comes from. And so it's a difficult situation. So if you go to this document right here, and you go to box 4, line 40, you will see the total shortfall for this biennium is $171 million, and that would be in the 2021-22 biennium. It's referenced at the top of your page, which is expected to grow to $721 million by 23-24, and 985 million by 25-26. The biggest gaps are in K-12 education spending. The state's revenue forecast is conservative, but it could very well be worse than projected. For example, it assumes oil prices between $40 and $50 per barrel, but those could have dropped to $35 per barrel or lower, which could make our outlook worse. The Legislative Stabilization Reserve Account, or the state's rainy day fund, has been used to backfill shortfalls, but is expected to hit its mandatory minimum balance by 25-26, at which time backstops to the school foundation program account will cease. The legislature must make difficult decisions in this session and even more difficult decisions in the coming biennia. We must either generate new revenue or reduce government programs, or a combination of the two. And that's really why I'm here talking to you tonight. I so much appreciate the invitation because we need to work together. Our state is facing historic revenue declines. We're facing historic budget shortfalls, and there's not an easy decision to be had. We all love our students, our teachers, our schools, our communities. But the reality of the situation is we can't continue the way we are. And so what are we going to do about it? And I'm asking you that question. I don't pretend to have any of the answers. We're doing the best we can to stop the bleeding in the supplemental budget. It's not an easy time to be an elected official for you or for me. And that's why I'm reaching my hand out to you today to ask for your help and that we could work together on this issue. I would take you then to up to the line 18 in box 2, the statutory transfer from the LISRA. It's the biggest contributor to the deficit in the school foundation program account. You can see this biennia, we backfilled $298 million roughly. The next year, if you go over to the 23-24 biennium, it would be roughly 546 million. And then 649 million by 25-26. As you see on line 18, that zeroes out what will be available in the rainy day fund. That actually, if you go down to line 42 in box 5, it shows you the balances in the rainy day fund. As of right now, we sit at 1.3 billion roughly. It would go down to 648 million in the next 2 biennia. And then you're down to the 543 million in 2025-26. That is then the point where it triggers stopping the backflow to K-12 education, which gives you your roughly $1 billion shortfall in that area. And so these are the figures that we are looking at and working off as a state legislature. As the school board and doing your budgeting, I just wanted to bring those to your attention. On page 10 of this packet, and this is a very informative packet, I hope you'll take the time to look through it on your own. On page 10 of this packet, you will see some of the revenue enhancements that are being contemplated. I think right now, I could say from the Senate side of things, until we make some necessary reductions that our constituents have asked us to do, we will not probably be as favorable to tax increases. But as you can see on number 1, under taxes and fees, a 1% sales and use tax, if the entire penny was dedicated to K-12 education, would yield $164.2 million in 22, $171.6 million in 23, and $178.7 million in 24. That is if the entire 1% sales tax is dedicated to K-12 education. If the state takes their share of the 31%, then you can see the reduction there. These are the other taxes that have been contemplated. As you can see, these kinds of tax increases cannot fill the hole that we have in our funding model and how we're funding K-12 education at this current time. There is a 5% escalator built in, and so it is escalating every year, the funding model. And so this is just, quite frankly, the information we're getting and where we're at. And so I'm coming to you today just to ask for your help, your guidance. You are the boots on the ground, and so I would love to dig into this together. That's pretty much what I have to share with you. There's a lot more packets full of information. One other thing I did want to address was that on September 30th of 2020, the Select Committee on School Finance and Recalibration did send out a letter to all of the school boards across the state asking for information and help. I know the State School Board Association adopted a resolution supporting the 1% sales tax. There were only a few districts that were heard from. I don't know if you're still able to provide input on that, but we didn't hear from Goshen County on that issue. So if you do want to provide that to me now, I would be glad to hear it. And so with that, I would conclude my remarks and allow Hans to and Shelley to add anything they would like to share.
Thank you, Sherry. And Sherry, being now a member of the appropriation committee, has really covered most of the basics. As far as just a little bit more on the taxes and fees, well, I should say the potential taxes and fees proposal. Again, the odds of these making it through the process are low, very low. Those bills have to start in the House, make their way through the process. We did not take up any of these during our 8-day session, which was concluded on Friday. But just as some sort of a forbearer to how these might fare, we had a couple of fee increase bills that, while they did pass, they were whittled down substantially. So it's, the odds that there's going to be a 1% tax on, I don't know, but I don't think it's very likely. So, like I say, the more into the details, sure, you kind of covered that. But we're here to listen to you all, and if there's any thoughts, suggestions, we're happy to. It's a rough state of affairs, and nobody likes where we're at, but it's frankly the long-term outlook. And regardless of what the federal administration does, regardless of what the federal government does, the continued demand for coal is going to continue to go down. As East Coast states continue to convert their power plants to natural gas, there's not much we can do about that. As far as the coal export lawsuits and those efforts, so far that hasn't gotten anywhere. I would say that the last government and this one as well have been reasonably diligent on that, but it just doesn't seem to be going anywhere, and I wouldn't expect that to change much either in the foreseeable future. So, we don't want to just be the bearers of bad news. We're all here to try and work through this together. So I guess that said, we're here to listen to you guys, and so, yeah.
And we don't want to take up a lot of time tonight. We know you'll have February 23rd is kind of your working session, so this just starts the conversation so that we're not starting from zero on that night. So, Shelley, do you have anything to add?
Thank you, Sherry and Hans, and thank you, school board members. Wow, pretty much they both already said everything that that I couldn't add anything further. There are quite a few bills coming through trying to have creative solutions But again, it takes all of us together to solve this issue. So any feedback you guys can give, all three of us, we're all appreciative. We're all, willing to help and answer. And Sherry, thank you for all the information that you provided to those guys. It's going to be pretty invaluable for them. And thanks for hearing us tonight.
I'll email you a copy. So that concludes what I have for you tonight.
Okay, does anybody have any questions for any of our legislators at this point? If not, I would turn your attention then to the handout that I asked Marcy to prepare. So the budget committee met a couple weeks ago, is that right? The three of us did, yeah. So, and we started to discuss some of this stuff, and Trustee Miller made a great point that considering the state of things and the situation we find ourselves in, this discussion needs to be more than just a budget committee. Really, the discussion needs to come from all of us, and everybody here needs to have input on what we do going forward. So this handout really is kind of a summary of what we talked about at the budget committee, just to get everybody up to speed. I asked Marcy to add some information, excuse me, I asked Ms. Cates, I apologize, to add some information to kind of really kind of get a picture of what we're looking at, considering the information that our representation, our legislators just presented. So at the top, we're looking at this anticipated reduction in our funding. So the first set of numbers is what our ADM was a year ago, and then in May. Okay, so that first line is for January 31st, 2021. So that is as of a couple weeks ago what our ADM number was. The second number is what it was in May at the end of the last school year. So you can see we have a almost 70 ADM drop in reduction of students. So that equates through the funding model of a loss of just over $1 million. There is this legislative recalibration that happens every 5 years. Is that what? So that is coming up. The best estimate that Ms. Cates has received at this point is that that's going to be 6.54%. So that is an additional just over $2 million that we're looking at not having. And then through the work, Ms. Cates again, working through what the proposed reductions through House Bill 89, and a lot of that information is what was presented to us tonight. What Goshen County School District's share of that is approximately $887,000. So total reduction of $3.9 million. Again, there's a lot of question marks in a lot of this stuff because nothing, again, our ADM could change, the recalibration could be a different percentage. There could be some changes to the bill. There's just a lot of unknowns in some of this stuff, but this is just kind of giving us an idea of what we're working with. So one of the comments that I made, and it came up in our budget meeting too, was how much of our carryover are we thinking we need to use to kind of help weather this storm, because that's what it's there for. We had Trustee Hager had a great question a while back about that carryover balance. We had a little bit of discussion via email. That's that we're allowed up to 15% on that formula to carry over. So if you look, and actually I'm just going to point you to the actual / projected. At the start of the year, we were sitting at 5.2 million in our carryover. With our anticipated activity, we're looking at needing to use 135,000 of that. So the projected ending carryover for this school year is 5.1 million, which puts us at 14.55%. And I believe the comment I made to Mr. Hager's question was, up until this year, I was always comfortable with having that carryover being somewhere between 10, 11, and 13%, because I didn't want to bump up against that 15 and risk sending money back, but I wanted to have something in the coffers if we ever came into a situation where we might need it, like kind of where we're at. So that's where we're really kind of where we're, the starting figure we're looking at is 5.1 million in our carryover. So there's a little, I asked Ms. Cates to put this note in here. So for every percent of, or for every $300,000 that we borrow out of that, that's 1% of our carryover. So as you look at the historically where we've been, you can see we've been anywhere between roughly 13 and right up against that 15. So that's just where we've been in the past. So the question I posed to my fellow trustees, and we don't need an answer tonight because I want you to think about it over the next 2 weeks. And as we work towards our budget work session, is we have right now anticipating that we're 3.9 million that we got to come up with in some combination of borrowing from our, well, not borrowing, taking from our carryover and proposed cuts. So part of the idea of that carryover is to help weather any sort of storm. It's our rainy day fund. But how much of that do we want to use? And if we can decide how much of that we're comfortable using, that helps with the next conversation of where do we make up the rest. So again, that's why I didn't want any action taken tonight. I just wanted some discussion. I wanted to send you guys home with some stuff to think about. So then when we come back in 2 weeks and we start talking about some of these other things that affect our budget, we have in our minds kind of where we're comfortable with what percentage is left in our carryover. Is there anything I missed there? In the budget committee, anything that, anybody have any questions about any of that? Because I kind of rushed through it.
I have a question. I know in our earlier discussions, we were talking about 10% cuts. You know, I think that the situation has gotten worse since we had those discussions of the 10%. You know, we've had a lot of things that have changed since that time. I would just like to know what it looks like, and God forbid we get to 20 or 30%. I mean, I just want to see what that picture is at that point. You know, I hope we never have to get there, but at least have an idea of where we could potentially be heading.
Okay.
So to kind of give you this is a rough estimate, as administrators and I have had conversations really centering around 3 different plans: Plan A, Plan B, Plan C. Plan A really takes a look at our ADM, or a loss of our 70 students, which is roughly the equivalent of about $1 million in funding. We know Plan A is, at the very least, best possible situation that we could even dream of would be we need to adjust for $1 million loss in our funding right now because of ADM, student loss. Plan B looks at the recalibration, and I'm just going to scroll up. And so that is that additional $2 million that is in still discussion at the legislative level and potential. We don't know. That's, again, one of those big question marks. That takes us up to about a total of 3.1 million. That is what we have potentially taken a look at hypothetically as administration. What does that mean in regards to programs, services, those types of things? And really how to quantify that is right now from all of our buildings, it would be the equivalent of about 13 certified staff members and 6 non-certified staff members. And that's probably a low estimate on that. And that's just for up to Plan B. Now, that would mean the possibility of not refilling 8 positions that have currently either offered early retirement or had other plans for the other following year, and then also not refilling one of the non-certified positions. So we have those additional positions that would still mean they're the possible cuts. That does not take into effect then other possible legislation that still may be remaining regarding the budget at the state level, which would include Plan C, which would be all 3 of those, and the possibility, as we just put in House Bill 89, which would be an additional estimated amount of $887,000. So you can kind of start to at least put that into picture of what that means in regards to job loss for the district, what that would mean in programming. You know, there's so many questions marks out there right now that the sooner we get into answers and the sooner we start committing to what are we comfortable with in regards to that carryover? Because when we at least take one of those question marks out, administrators and us as a budget committee and as a board can start to look at here's potential looking down the future. The other piece is we always have to remember on that carryover is that's a 1-year fix. That is not a long-term fix that we can rely on, but it does allow us some pre-planning time to take a look next fall and, okay, this is our goal. Because right now, we have so many question marks and totally understandable from the legislative perspective, they have those same question marks. And so when we get those answers, the sooner check boxes we can make, the easier it is to have those conversations. The difficulty in making those conversations or having those conversations and making those decisions too early can sometimes be potentially negative also because there are funding possibilities out there that might exist down the line or what things might change. I mean, the other piece that we're hoping for is, yes, we had a loss of 70 students through ADM. I'm going to show later on in the meeting in my report where that's evident, but our projection-wise as a district, for the previous 3 years to COVID-19, we were maintaining our student population. That 70 is an irregularity by hopes. So there is the possibility after next year that we could see an increase because those 70 students are back in our classrooms or either through virtual or remote learning. And so that's the difficulty of planning this and all those question marks that remain out there. Did that kind of answer what you're looking for?
It did. I'm not necessarily looking for set in stone answers because I don't think anybody can give any of that.
Exactly.
But I would like to know a better representation of what our options are potentially going to be moving forward. You know, it's people. You know, this means people. This means kids. This affects all of us. So I just think we need to really know what our options are moving forward and what the repercussions of these decisions are. You know, that's all I was getting at.
Do we know, or maybe Sherry can answer, like that, the legislative recalibration 6.54%, do we know what dates, like when will we know that for sure? Is there?
So I would say probably when session's over, which is April 2nd, 3rd, around there. I don't think we'll have any answers until the bill is in the process. I think that's a House bill right now because it's running with 1% sales tax and a $100 million reduction. And I haven't studied the bill yet because it's on the House side. We'll see. I usually wait until it gets to the Senate side and see what they did. But that's the recal bill right now, as to my understanding. If I could, if you would give me the liberty, Mr. Chairman, address House Bill 89. It sounds like that will probably be a no-go. It is one of the least reductions that we are seeing. So it compared to other bills, it's not nearly as draconian, but it sounds like if that bill goes anywhere, it will be parsed out and amended into other bills. So it sounds like that bill won't be moving forward.
So I guess just so I understand, so that line item, at least in terms of what we have in our handout here, probably not that number or that dollar figure, but there's proposed other legislation that may change that figure.
So there's and who knows what more will come, because we haven't seen the bill deadline for individual bills. And so that it's just up in the air right now.
The bill deadline will be, and like in the first 10 days of our acting session. So we've got like, so we'll go back in session on March 1st. And we've already eaten up 9 days, so it'll be on the first session will be on the deadline, in my understanding. Between now and then, who knows what will be. And I really have to, you know, Shelley's right. We've got, there could be some creative things going either way, whether it's reductions, whether it's increases, whatever. But, you know, we've got better than about 3 weeks left to see what comes out of the woodwork.
Sure.
So there will be budget amendments too.
Okay. And I guess just to, I asked for that number to be included in what we presented tonight, just to give us something, because we do understand that there is going to be some sort of legislative piece to this that we have to consider. And I didn't mean to misstate a number or to give false information. It was just, I thought it was best to have as much information as we had in front of us, so we kind of had an idea what we were working with.
I think that's great. Thank you for that.
And I guess I would just have to say that, you know, in kind of going with what was said earlier, as far as, you know, these, we're talking people, we're talking our kids' education. I have a hard time understanding about the 1% sales tax that, you know, it was said that, yeah, it's not going to cover everything, but it gets us a little bit closer to filling the gap. And then I hear, well, that's probably not going to go very far. That's where I have, you know, difficulty in we're looking at, you know, reductions, and we're looking at changing the picture, but to me, it just seems a small price to pay for our kids' education and for people's lives. So that's it. Thank you.
One additional thing that I'd like to ask our new members to roll around in their mind is that when those of us on the salary and benefit relations group bring a proposal to you, it will be for a budget that is in essence deficit spending, because we are spending more than we're taking in. Some of our prior board members have really struggled with the concept that we were committing that act, even though that's what we needed to do in order to have our school district function as well as they could. So please, you know, think about how that will impact you each as we approach that.
And as we talk about deficit spending, that means dipping into the cash reserves.
Right.
If I may. So just a few points. First, I want to thank our legislative delegation for coming tonight. Senator Steinmetz, Representative Hunt, and Representative Duncan. I appreciate your presentation this evening to us. I have one question. You mentioned oil, and part of this, we know Wyoming's oil economy being, did you say $50? I didn't catch that, the current projection was based off oil at $50 per barrel.
Let me find out. I think that's what I put in there, and I gave that handout to you.
Sorry, I wasn't.
Order, so
I think
it's on that handout that I gave you. I think it's
$40 to $50 a barrel.
Oh, there it is. Okay.
It's the talking points I referenced are right on that front page of that other second handout I gave you.
Perfect. Thank you.
So, yeah, and then also if you look at this long-term revenue profile, the suppositions of how they come to that are on the second page. So you can read through all of that as well. That also takes into account that our cities and counties receive $105 million out of the rainy day account as well. And so they're facing a 10% decrease in funding this year as well because of that account. And so when that account zeroes out, they'll lose that entire amount as well.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think the other piece that I'd just like to is I've spoken to a number of educators in the last week, 15, 20 teachers plus, I would say, that have just sought me out. And I just want to offer a sincere thanks and appreciation coming off one of the worst probably years of your educational careers. And the fantastic job you've done at taking the reins and educating our children. It means a lot. And what I don't want is these budget discussions to in some way make you feel that you're less valued because of this budget discussion. I know that's difficult in these situations. I think that our state delegation as well as the school board here is going to have some very difficult decisions. There's no doubt we need to be more proactive in reducing costs and managing expense as a district. So I appreciate the work that's being done by the district. I think that ADM, I think we should be somewhat comfortable in spending some of our reserve because I do, studying that ADM, I would anticipate some of that return. And then oil is a boom and bust thing. I mean, it's not going away in the short term, long term maybe. And I think that that will be interesting to see what the next biennium does. If oil does sit where it is today versus the $45 to $50 a barrel, you know, somewhere around 60 today. And so hopefully that works in our favor for at least a short term until we can diversify the economy further. I think the other thing that's important to recognize is the difficulty in providing rural education versus urban education in a more densely populated area. We're just not as efficient. It's difficult to spread some of the fixed costs across a lot of heads when you're as diverse as we are as a state. And so we face unique challenges. And I think I've rambled through my points, but I just, again, to our educators specifically, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, this is Representative Duncan.
Yes, please.
I just wanted to address real quick about the oil. I just want to make sure that that people understand during COVID and during the height of some of this was the first time in historic lows where Wyoming did not have any wells producing. That's the first time since statehood. At one point we had oil go to $10 to $20 below in the negative per barrel versus the 30 to the 50 that our budget is, that our Craig report and our budget is calibrated on, is the $50 a barrel. So we have all of those issues. You know, we have our major maintenance fund for our schools is based on coal lease bonuses, and we have none in the hopper, none in the future. And so in the last year or two, we've had none of those. And so that is a major problem with financing for education as well. As long as the price of gas is extremely low, we're going to see the reduction and the use of power plants going and converting to gas versus coal. So that's an issue. So it's a compound issue when we're talking about minerals and we're relying on minerals for our education. So just to put a little bit of framework and context behind it, yes, we are a boom and a bust, but we've had some historic lows and historic situations recently that have caused and impacted some of this issue. That's all I wanted to contribute.
Thank you. Mr. Foster? Did you? He was making sure.
Senator Duncan.
Gotcha. That's like,
Representative Duncan.
I was waiting for Mr. Foster to give us his projections on oil and gas.
I don't have any projections. Well, it's kind of just a goofy thing that I was thinking about, but I just seen on here cigarette taxes and it just made me think, not to say bad about the kids, but how many people under the age of 21 buy a pack of cigarettes, or are they buying those vape cartridges? So I was just curious on this cigarette tax. Is that the actual pack of cigarettes, or does that include all tobacco?
I think it's all tobacco and the added vape.
It's all tobacco, so cigarette tax is the traditional increase to 8 cents back, and then that's, chewing tobacco here, there's an increase of, I want to say, I'm doing it off the top of my head, 80 cents, is the proposal. I can pull that up, but, that's not on there, but it's tobacco plus. Now, the vaping product, that's your question, I'm not sure what that is.
If you just wanted my personal thing, you could add like $5 to those vape cartridges, then it might slow the kids down, or at least make them get a job.
I think that's right, I think we did that.
We had it late last year.
I had a question more about our carryover. Just as we're pondering how much we want to backfill that number at the top. Is our carryover pretty average?
In terms of average, in terms of like statewide or?
Across the state or across your experience?
As I meet with the other business managers, historically, people talk about 10%. This year is going to be, and I'm sure that other districts are having the same conversation. So we're probably in the upper portion right now. I mean, when you look here, 14.5%, we cannot have over 15. If we get over 15, then that dollar amount goes back to the state.
Is there anything, proposed thoughts in the legislature about increasing that 15%?
We have talked about that. We've talked about that or other incentives to save and utilize your own funds that been efficient and held over. So I'm interested in your thoughts on that. How that you might see that working. So if you've been here a while and understand what that means to the district. So,
Mr. Chairman, I've actually proposed to Superintendent Kramer's idea of carryover of 2 years versus a 1 year carryover. And I've proposed that to several people on the education committee. Haven't heard much traction on it, but I keep bringing that up as a possibility.
So can you maybe provide a little more?
Well, and one of the pieces there is there are certain years that we do and have an ability, like last year. Last year, we found ourselves, because of COVID, not having face-to-face school March, April, and May. We ended up having some expenditures in June because we were concerned about exceeding that 15%. Had we had an ability to, on a 1 year, have a special carryover, that would have allowed us to then possibly prepare for this year. But because of the current legislation, or current rules in place, that wasn't possible. Now, that wouldn't benefit us going into this year, but there may be other years down the line where that might be a benefit. I know trying to have that balance between, where the state that I came from, there was no requirement. And so some schools had up to 30% of carryover budget, which is ridiculous. It is unfounded that any school district should not be utilizing those funds to serve students or keeping that top money. So I do appreciate the rules and regulations that are there because I think they do fit, but I think there needs to be certain situations like we found ourselves in this last year that allow us for some unique circumstances because COVID was unique. And there are some upcoming situations that we may find ourselves in that may put us in that same situation again. So that's kind of the thought process behind that 2-year average piece or 2-year taking a look at it for a 1-year reprieve by allowing that.
And I guess just to add one more comment on that, while we did expend some money at the end of last year to get us to stay under that 15%, we basically had prepaid some expenses for this current year, which I think even in my previous life in public accounting, that's just prudent tax planning. So I even in that decision, I felt like we were still being fiscally responsible. We weren't just spending money to spend money. There was a reason behind it.
Thank you for mentioning that because you're absolutely right. The purchases that we made were actually purchases that were going to come into this budget year. And so really we were planning ahead to make sure we didn't have that expenditure because we could tell in that situation there were going to be times in which we have to utilize it. One of the things that I think is the most difficult for many people outside of the school system or outside of public office to understand are the different buckets of money that we do have. One of the, in particular tonight, as you could see, the amount of expenditures we made this evening didn't really align with having the same conversation. But really that knowledge base of where those buckets of money are coming from, where you can see on that page that Chairman Jesperson referenced earlier, we in some areas and funds had some significant increases over this year, and really to sit on funds that could benefit students potentially by making those expenditures, but doesn't relate to our general fund is very important because those dollars sitting in a fund in a bank don't help students, don't help staff, don't help our community. And making those expenditures out of those funds that we are flush in are important to still make and still important to keep the business of schools going and keeping on our continual system. So that's hard to, and it's difficult. It's a difficult decision for trustees to make those decisions and those expenditures when immediately following we have to talk specifically about budget and the significant cuts that might have to come from one of those buckets.
So any other questions or comments? So Superintendent Kramer just touched on it, and I'll point out in our work session, we're going to talk about the funding in these different buckets a little bit more, and then we'll also be talking about the funding model in terms of all this, and so all that just to add more color to the budget discussion. So that'll be part of our work session as well. Okay, if there's no other discussion on that, we will move on to item L.
Sorry, can I ask our representative just one more question?
Absolutely.
Has there been any discussion from the governor's office or direction from the legislature to the governor's office regarding using, I am understanding that there's excess CARES dollars that the state was not able to expend efficiently to help some of the schools across the state, because I assume we're not the only district that saw a drop in ADM because either fear of sending kids to school this year or didn't want to send kids to school with a mask, whatever it might be, to help bridge that gap in ADM for the 1 year.
So my understanding is they were talking about holding you harmless. That would be from the state superintendent of public instruction. And I also, the way I understand it is you get the highest of the 3-year rolling average of ADM or the highest ADM. So I wouldn't think that would affect you because of the 3-year rolling average. But I mean, it wouldn't be 70, if you know what I mean. Then the second thing, there's not a lot of CARES Act money left. They're talking about aid for the egg community because the program was so shortened and the losses weren't realized on paper. And so there was about $55 million that might have been available there. They're also talking about more aid for hospitals. So that's another conversation that's being had. I haven't heard anything about schools on that. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And before we move on, I do want to thank the three of you for joining us tonight and having the discussion and giving us the information so we could have something to go off of.
Just to clarify on the subject of the tobacco tax, I just looked that up. So anyway, it's 2 cents per pack, and then it's an increase from the current 60 cents to moist snuff, that's what our statute called chewing tobacco, 72 cents per ounce. So that's what's in there, but I don't think the e-cigarettes included in this, because it strictly says cigarettes and moist snuff, and does not include the all-inclusive language that we adopted last year in calling it nicotine products. It specifically says cigarettes and chewing tobacco. So I don't know how I feel about the proposal of tax itself, but I think that if that's going to be discussed, the basic product is exclusive. So anyway, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. So again, thank you for joining us and then giving us some information, and I appreciate your time and look forward to visiting with all three of you more on this as we move forward. Okay, item L is a continued discussion on standards-based grading. This is just stemming from our work session, and part of that, when we were trying to decide what this work session was going to be on, I know there was a desire to continue the standards-based grading discussion, moving on into some specific points. And in our agenda planning meeting, we decided that maybe this budget thing would be more important at the time, but I still conveyed to Mr. Kramer that we needed to move this discussion forward. So that's why I asked him to give us email updates on some specific points that they brought up in their admin meetings. So with that, I'll turn it over to anybody who wants to take the floor to, if there's any questions or any other concerns, or if Mr. Kramer has some information for us that we can take with us tonight.
I was just going to actually bring up then that document that I shared with all the trustees yesterday, which stemmed from the conversation around some thoughts and ideas about things that we could make changes to immediately. I think I look at this as two different stages, really. One being work things that we can make within this semester that would have an impact on the standards-based conversation, and what we heard and what things we could do to address. One of the biggest things that we heard was in regards to accountability for classwork and homework. So one of the first bullets that we talked about, and this is something that individual buildings are developing a process of how to hold students accountable. Examples of this may be including flex time or other similar practices to reinforce the importance of practice work. Those things will be developed at each building level and will be put in place that might look unique to where they might have flex time, what other accountability measures they can have in place to really hold that classwork and homework in high esteem, as was illustrated on conversations and through survey. The other piece was teacher assessments and the ability to put teacher assessments that might necessarily be developed commonly in the gradebook. And so we open that up to say that any teacher assessment can be inputted in the gradebook and count as a grade. Under the situation that it be tied to a standard and graded. So what we need in each of those, if a teacher determines that they want one of their teacher assessments, what should be included in that teacher assessment is an assignment description, the success criteria that are attached to that assignment. So there might be different success criteria or standards that are tied. So really your overall success criteria is your goals for what should be accomplished on this assignment, should be stated. Then also a statement of the top score possible. So when we talk about scoring of standards, we do have different various levels of work. Some worksheets or some assignments may be very low level thinking, but are important for practice. But that doesn't necessarily indicate a student is achieving or exceeding the standard. So if I per se have an assignment that is low level learning, but I get every single one of them right, that doesn't hold the same esteem as another assignment that is extremely high level learning, where I may only get 3 out of 4 of the questions right, or I may get the easiest 3 questions correct, but when I really am assessed on that highest base of learning, I really don't understand the concept or I'm able to exceed the standard. So that's where we talk about needing in that assignment to illustrate top score possible. This is where it becomes a little bit tricky when we incorporate that into our student information system. So for instance, when I get an announcement on my phone in regards to my student's grade, and the grade comes out as a D, unless I go in and look at that and look at what level of learning that they accomplished, that may be the highest level of learning they could accomplish because was lower than what that standard is. So we're trying to incorporate improvement throughout the semester so students can show that level of learning. And some levels of learning need to be attainable early on in that process as opposed to later in the semester where we have our expectations have been risen and the standard has to be either met or exceeded. Other bullet, if you're providing an assignment for students to complete and requiring them to turn it in, feedback is expected. Please grade it attached either with verbal or written feedback individually. One thing too, on the next bullet, we absolutely have the autonomy with teachers is they can work within their collegial group to develop assessments that will be given commonly. They can instruct with any tools that they would like, and they can assign any lesson. This kind of relates back to that first bullet in regards to work completion. There still needs to be that accountability, and we still need to figure out how that might fit into each individual school and how we can hold each individual student accountable for that work and practice that we do know is important. And then, of course, the last, student's grade on the standard success criteria can be lowered or raised based on teacher judgment. If it's lowered, we would have a conversation with the principal so they can make sure and look at that body of evidence in regards to that standard and making sure it adequately reflects that student's achievement. So those are the early fixes. There have been some suggestions that those teachers that, after we sent this last week to them, have provided. Some of those suggestions will probably need to have some further thought because they will take more than a semester to implement and will be implemented going into first semester of next year. So I think we've gotten a good start. I think there's, of course, things that we need to continually improve and continually have those conversations about, and the best way to assess students and the best way to hold them accountable for that work. The best conversation that we can have too is making sure any work that we're requiring of students is directly linked to what that final outcome is expected. Sometimes in education, as I've experienced, even as a teacher, is we don't always do the best job of linking practice and some of those daily tasks with the eventual outcomes. And we need to really become better at that, because once we attach meaningful assignments and meaningful learning on a daily basis to that, students will be motivated to learn. Also, the importance is having that learning accessible, and that is challenging because we have such varying levels within each individual classroom. But I'll show you actually too later on the superintendent's report. I would like to show you something that we haven't really done. I know at least in the last year and a half I've not done, is really talked on these meetings about common assessment data. And I want to share that data so to illustrate a lot of the points in regards to standards-based grading that might kind of make some links for you to truly understand what we're doing at each individual building.
Thank you, Mr. Kramer. Does anybody have any?
I just had a question at the very beginning of that. You said that you were gonna looking into giving more time during flex time to do assignments, or so they're already not doing the assignments, but we're giving them more time to do this. I just need some clarification.
Yep, no, flex time, I don't know if you're familiar with what flex time is. It is a time period within the day where a student can be assigned by that individual teacher to come meet with them and then spend time to do that work. Or the expectation is, it's not usually, if you get flexed by a teacher, it is usually not a positive thing. It is usually perceived by students as negative, because if you do not have a flex, then you have time that is more based on your own interests. Depending upon the school building, each building has their kind of own set of expectations or set of things that they can allow. I know some flex has been where it is open campus, where if I don't get flexed by a teacher, which means all my work is completed, I don't have to be on campus. And so there is a goal or motivator to complete those assignments so I don't get flexed by a teacher or do well on that assessment, so I might not have to go in for that retake. Does that kind of answer you? Awesome.
And I guess noting the hour, if our student reps have other things they need to be doing, if they have homework or just want to hit the hay, you're welcome to excuse yourselves. We do appreciate your participation tonight. You know, I had some comments that I wanted, but I'll just send them in an email because I don't need to hammer on some of this stuff. So I'll reserve my comments for an email thread I'll send tomorrow. Is there anything, not to discourage any discussion, I don't want to prolong with my comments.
I just think going off of what you just said, I think all of us probably have comments. We're planning to do another work session on this, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. This isn't the end of it. I want this discussion to move forward, and I expressed to Mr. Kramer the need for consistent updates on how we're doing on some of these points, because it is important. Okay. Item 4, topics for discussion. Does anybody have anything they would like to bring before the fellow trustees? I have 2 items. One, there was a discussion, I believe it was Trustee Patrick and Trustee Sussex and I, prior to interviewing our student reps, we had a little discussion about our attorney, Tracy Copenhaver, also is the attorney for the Wyoming School Board Association. There's some concern that if there were ever to be any sort of conflict between the 2 bodies, how would that work? Now, I don't know if you guys can provide an answer to that tonight, or if it's something that would require research. I don't know how interested we are in maybe exploring changing that relationship at this point. I just think if we had more information as to how that would work, that would help us kind of move forward.
If I may.
Please.
Ms. Gates and I had a conversation relating around to that. One of the biggest things and factors in is there is needed some further investigation to have some of those questions answered. We challenged ourselves and we couldn't, and please step in at any point in time, when with the governing body of the Wyoming School Board Association, where there would be conflict outside of our only relationship really stems from the hiring practices and relating to when they are involved with us in relation to a superintendent search. Outside, they seem to be a systemic organization that might support us, and there may be other examples that we could figure. Probably one of the biggest things that I look at is, I would say there are only maybe 2 districts in the state that don't utilize Mr. Copenhaver as a representation. So the same concern might be more forthcoming, might be more evident, but some requirements to do some little bit more research would be necessary. But for the most part, I wouldn't have any concerns based on services provided, but those other extenuating circumstances might need to be further investigated.
Did I hit on that? Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, ma'am.
The other piece and what I shared with Mr. Kramer is that Tracy Copenhaver, being our district attorney, he also is the attorney for school risk retention, of which we belong to that insurance pool and they provide our insurance. So I see that potentially maybe being a bigger issue in that he's working for the district, but yeah, he's also working for our insurance pool. That it's really nice to have both Tracy Copenhaver and Scott Kopechty with their school personnel law and that knowledge, but there are a few attorneys in Cheyenne that we could seek out and probably visit with some of those school districts that are using somebody else.
Okay, I would just, if you would look into some of that stuff maybe a little further and if you think that if we need to proceed with something different, or maybe we can just have a continued discussion about that later. Okay. Is there any other topics that trustees would like to discuss? My last one is I attended some board chair training this past Saturday. Lots of good information. Hopefully it'll help me work better for you guys. And the one thing that they said that really stuck out for me is that the board chair is really the leader of leaders. We're all elected to this position. We're all leaders in the community. And it just kind of further emphasizes the point I try to make, is that we're all working together. And I really appreciate everybody, this board of trustees, the questions, the discussion. You guys are doing a fantastic job and making my job really easy. So I appreciate everything you guys are doing, and I look forward to continuing down that road with you all. So that's all I have. So item E on future meetings, make sure you check your schedule for your school visits, and hopefully our principals are contacting you if they have something in their school or student recognition. The WSBA Winter Board Development Workshops are continuing to be offered virtually on Thursdays at noon through the end of February. And that is, I think they send out an email about that occasionally. Is everybody receiving those? Is anybody taking part in any of those? Trustee Schmidt? Okay, excellent. We will have as mentioned, the special board meeting, board work session on Tuesday, February 23rd at 7 o'clock. We will be talking about the future years funding and the Wyoming education funding model, as well as some budget things. Next regular board meeting is Tuesday, March 2nd, 7 o'clock, which has been rescheduled for March 9th. So with that, I turn it over to Superintendent Kramer.
Okay, I already have a number of different items I want to kind of go over and share. Let's stop that share. Let's go. So as you can see here, this is the enrollment data and numbers. So highlights in red indicate a 10% or more reduction. As you can see in LaGrange, because of the low end number, 10% is pretty easily attained, because you can see even with a loss of 2 students, being that it's a low number, for the previous 3 years, they've had more than a 10% decrease in student population. Then Lingo Fort Laramie High School, this year and last year, there was an increase in enrollment. And so that is on one of our positive enrollment increases. Fort Lingo Elementary, you can see that there was a variance. Yellow indicates a reduction, but not 10% or more. And then middle school, they were increasing enrollment until this year, where there was a slight decrease. Again, Lincoln Elementary, the last 2 years have been a slight decrease in total. Southeast Elementary did see a 2-year increase, and then this year, the decrease. Southeast High School, you can see 2 out of the 3 years, there was a 10% decrease, or more than 10%, and then one of those years was a decrease, but it did not meet or exceed 10%. Junior high from Southeast. Trail Elementary, you can see they've had kind of a variance, a slight decrease again this year. Torrington High School has had a slight decrease all 3 years. Torrington Middle School, and then of course, for the grand total, there was a decrease in 2019, and then an increase last year of 3 students, or 3 ADM, and then the decrease this year of 70.61 is where our January average. We do figure this on a monthly basis. Number of homeschool students Last year, there was 96. Enlarge that a little bit. 96. Currently, this year, we've had that increase of 20 students. We started the year with 61 students enrolled in remote. This number of remote and virtual are included in this 1580, so you're aware. And then we started the year with 70 students in virtual, and now that is down to 36. Those students have since returned to face-to-face learning, and were not necessarily losses to the district, but have returned to in-class learning from the start of the school year. So that covers the student enrollment numbers as we kind of progress through. Any questions on enrollment or anything related to that information? Okay. The next one I want to bring up is common assessment data, and I spoke briefly about this in the earlier agenda item, and I'm going to enlarge this a little bit. Okay, so as you can see, this is kindergarten, and what I did was took the Common Assessment 1 and Common Assessment 2. The percent on this right side illustrates the number of percent of students that what we call first best instruction. Our goal is the first time we teach it and then assess it, over 80% of our students actually achieve what the expectation is. So as you can see from this kindergarten group, if we look at the standard of recognize and name all upper and lowercase letters in the alphabet, 85% of our students achieved that standard first time. Now, what I'll show next month is we also then have common assessment retakes. So on each of these common assessments, you have the option to retake, and then it's illustrated. So this is a district total then on first best instruction. Green indicates that it's over 80%. Yellow indicates that it is right in that 70% range. And then we'll notice as I scroll over, we have some subgroups that we really try to take a look at. And one being special education. And you can see red indicates below 50%. This orange indicates between 50 and 70%. And then we also have, in addition to the special education subgroup, a Hispanic subgroup. And you can see how those students achieve. It's really important as we have those discussions related to first best instruction, as we take a look at these standards, you can see these are where it's pretty evident on what kind of assessments they're taking, how we're assessing those. Then I have on each tab then, first grade here. And what I tried to do was stay with language arts this first time through and sharing this information. As you can see then, with collegial pieces, we can see and start to understand where there might be holes in instruction, either that takes place initially on first best instruction from the standpoint of the teachers in this school year, like in the first grade, or this might be something that might relate to building blocks that maybe not are focused in the kindergarten level. And so it's really important to look at those different holes and different items through our item analysis and looking at those standards and which students we have as successful and which ones we might need to even either look at our first best instruction or look at our remediation practices. Same as I move up through second grade, as you can see here too, as we look, teachers, being that it's color-coded and the accessibility for teachers, they do have their individual classroom assessments that they can take a look at and then utilize this to determine, there's some areas where I need to really take a look at what type of changes I can modify with instruction, or how can I better assist students in accessing that information. Also, one other color that I didn't reference was the blue, where on that has 100% of students. And that is our ultimate goal, is after the retakes, and hopefully we'll see that comparison as we progress through and I show the retake data next month, that we'll see a lot of those blues, because the goal is that it's a guaranteed and viable curriculum, that every student has access and every student should be accessing the information and able to access the standards. Now, there might be some need at, for instance, special education, and where they might need some assistance or might need to have some modifications to it to attain and meeting that standard. But here's third grade then. And then fourth grade, and I misspoke on the blue is actually 90% and above on first best. You'll see here too that it illustrates in language arts the 6 ideas of writing, ideas, organization, voice. Then we move up to 5th grade in language arts. Then in 6th grade, I moved over to mathematics and for those assessments. And as you can see, same types of things in color coding, looking at our standards, ones that we completely understand, like 6 RPA 3B is referencing using the use of tables to compare ratios. Our students, 70% of, just over 70% of our students exceeded that standard, met or exceeded that standard on first attempt. And then moving into 7th grade, you can see there's various on common assessments. They vary from grade level to grade level in how many were assessed in that first semester. So you can see in 7th grade, Common 1 and Common 2 covered 2 sets of standards or success criteria. And then in 8th grade, mathematics, and then finally in algebra, just kind of scroll over there, and you can see that progression. Then, because there's within the high school area, I didn't stay with the mathematics, but I wanted to kind of look at some courses we don't usually talk about because they're not considered part of those that we assess based on the state standards, and that was the area of social studies. So I wanted to focus on world civics and cultures. And so you can see this illustration here. This is a really varied where students are really having a strong grasp on first best instruction on the ability to identify 7 continents and 4 major oceans. But areas that we might want to really have and look at, either to take a look at how we instruct that the next year or what are the building blocks to meet the standard, might be students cite evidence to justify which civilization was the most advanced. Well, as you can see too, there's different levels of standards. Obviously, an identification of 7 continents and 4 major oceans is not really the equivalent of the ability for a student to cite evidence to justify civilization. So that's the difficulty there as we contemplate all putting those together for a final grade. Really, this gives me a better indication because I would say the citing of evidence and justification is certainly higher level learning than strictly identifying 7 continents and 4 major oceans. So then as we look down American history, you can see there are some really ones that we really did very well on and some ability to kind of expand on some learning there. Modern American studies, again, some really positive outcomes that we're seeing on those common, and also too, commonly developed. You can see that this actually in this group in semester 1, they actually had 4 different commons, CA1, CA2, CA3, and CA4 to make up all of these and attain these standards and be able to give feedback on those. So that is all of our common assessment data. I went a lot quicker than I would have liked to because I think this is really important information that I plan to spend a little bit more time in future months on to really completely understand how we're utilizing this information and the importance that we have and place on it at the district level. Any questions on our common assessment information?
Mr. Superintendent Kramer, do you have a sense of the amount of consideration that's given to the rigor of the common assessments so that assessments aren't being designed so that they can be, so that 80% or more of the students can achieve proficiency?
That's an excellent question. It is really important as we take a look and develop those things. And it really involves us as a board setting those goals in relation to what do we want to see from a graduate, because that's what's really an important piece also is that rigor and relevance of the assessment and how valuable is that learning and how can we make sure that it's attainable, but yet strives for that level of standard and attainment. And so when we get together collegially as a group like kindergarten in regards to discussing this, one of the most important conversations they can have is, yeah, we love to see green. We do. But that's not the end all be all, because if we have low level assessment that doesn't have rigor, then we're just accomplishing having 80% of their students. That's not the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is to have the ability, like I kind of referenced earlier, was for students, and I think it was in the world, yes, the world says, is it's all well and good for the identification of 7 continents and 4 major oceans, but it is so much more important that we have the building blocks so kids are able to cite evidence and justify information, because that's much more important. And so those building blocks and that rigor level, and you can see, I would say based on the information we're seeing, that this group probably has a pretty rigorous and relevant assessment on that standard. But now the next piece in that conversation comes in how can we develop this, not just at the freshman level, but how can we develop those skills earlier on and building up to that justification and the ability for students to do that. So hopefully I answered that question correctly.
Yeah,
or the way
appreciate-
at least answered it, I should say.
I was not able to articulate what I was trying to say very well.
I
but
think
you've
I got it, so, yeah.
Thank you.
Can you clarify for me the Hispanic subgroups?
Yes.
What exactly is subgroup?
So anytime we have within education subgroups that are identified either at the federal level, because we have a certain percentage of our population that exceeds 10%. So over 10% of our population identifies either through special education or identifies as Hispanic in heritage. And so when we take that, we can further divide that information then and identify, is this an area that we find ourselves weak, that we're not meeting the needs of our students, certain student levels. There's also another area that we might focus on are free and reduced lunch rates. But with our numbers and things, it's a little bit harder to identify that as a group, and this has been identified as a goal to meet the needs of the Hispanic subgroup, because as we found in our YTOP information, that subgroup has traditionally, unfortunately for Goshen County, not had the same level of achievement as maybe our students that identify as Caucasian. Does that answer your question, Carlos?
Yeah, so the term Hispanic comes, it's whose term? Where is the term, where is that generated from?
From when student registration forms.
So, okay. So it's anybody that identifies themselves as Hispanic?
Yep, on the student information system, yep. Any other questions? Okay. Quick update on COVID-19 vaccinations. Fortunately, last week, we were able to access some shots for our staff members. We currently have 170 staff, roughly 42% of our staff interested in being vaccinated for COVID-19. We were able to, through public health's help, have the first dose of the vaccine provided to approximately 57 of our staff last week, Thursday. This week, in partnership with Public Health and Banner Health, we're going to be able to have all of our remaining staff members who are interested receive the vaccination this week or early next week. So we appreciate Public Health's work and Banner Health's work on getting us set up to have those that are interested. 42% of our staff will have been vaccinated with the first dose by midweek next week. And then we'll coordinate then through those different groups through Banner and Public Health to get that second dose. Banner's been great in trying to schedule those so it doesn't conflict with any of instruction and having to cover. Last week, because it was such a quick, we found out less than 24 hours before the shot date that we were going to have set aside for us the shots that we were able to access. So we made sure to either utilize people that were on our list that we could cover very easily, or that we could get over there in a manner that was not disruptive to their classroom. And I appreciate the administration's work at the different buildings and nurses and their work to coordinate that and make sure we could get everybody who was eligible for that shot last week vaccinated, and then the help of public health and Banner Health this week in making sure we're providing times that aren't in conflict with their typical time they're getting in school. So it's been a coordinated effort and really coming to some fruition in being able to get our staff vaccinated that are interested in doing so.
I do have one question, and first of all, I think this is fantastic, but I have heard numerous times that the second shot hits people harder than the first shot. And the first shot was given on a Thursday. So what happens if we get the second shot on a Thursday and Friday they can't come to school?
And that's why I have to thank Banner Health too, in actually coordinating with Janelle. She's been phenomenal. They're already thinking ahead how they're going to schedule, because they're going to have approximately 100 of our staff there. So they're going to have the largest number going through their process. And they've already said, we plan on doing those on a Friday. So it's non-disruptive to the staff and the students, to where we would have to worry about different things relating to that second shot, because I've heard that same thing. We've also found that those individual staff members who may have had COVID earlier and they did not have a lot of the heavy symptoms or significant symptoms, but then had the shot the first time, it was almost as if they were reacting as if they got their second shot. Because their immune system is reacting that quickly. So we've had a few of those situations last week, and that's kind of, it's very interesting. We're learning something every day. I also want to appreciate and identify Trustee Miller. He did a presentation for our staff last Wednesday regarding the vaccination. That was great, actually very informative for me to really truly understand the difference in this vaccination versus some other, and the speed at which it was developed, and then some things that we kind of see in the future. So I appreciate you taking the time to do that, because I know you're extremely busy in doing that. And I've had some great comments from our staff and their appreciation for you doing that also.
Pleasure.
Other questions related to that? And the last one, update on graduation and prom planning. We are planning to proceed with everything as scheduled. May 23rd is our graduation date. We will proceed with having those at the afternoon. We do plan to have those, like we did this last year, at an outdoor venue to allow as many people as possible. We do have some contingency plans in case the weather wouldn't cooperate, because as we know, when we did it this last year, it was a few weeks later, which allowed for the likelihood of some better weather. May 23rd is rolling that dice. It could be snowing, it could be raining, it could be 100 degrees. So we do have some contingency plans, but we thought it best to plan for an outdoor venue, because we can accommodate as many people as possible. We feel graduation is of the utmost importance to have as many family members present as possible. And then also prom, we do plan to proceed with our April 24th. We will most likely have to apply for a variance in order to hold that. In our conversations with public health, we do believe, based on our current metrics and based on where we were at, and hopefully where we will be at in April, that we'll be granted a variance to hold prom on that scheduled date. And we feel pretty confident moving forward with that.
What date was that?
April 24th. That's everything I have.
Thank you, Mr. Kramer. Is there anything else to come before the board? Hearing none, this meeting's adjourned.
Through the WSBA.